Chapter 10. Sides was early again to Dr. Ford's office. He sat in silence, eyes drifting to the wall clock. 3 minutes past the hour. He wondered what could be keeping him. Dr. Ford's office was one of 4 tucked into an older building that, from the street, still looked like a single-family home. Decades ago, this stretch had been zoned residential, but times changed. Now the building housed a small cluster of professionals, sharing a quiet corner of a city that was steadily being remade. When Sides parked earlier, he'd noticed a large sign staked into the ground. Preserve the Square. It was a reference to the historic district he sat in now, an area beloved by some, resented by others. Sides had never known much about the organization behind the sign, nor about anyone connected to it. He'd never been assigned to this ward, never even worked alongside officers who had. The square, as it was known, had long been regarded as an anomaly, a cultural outpost surrounded by neighborhoods that looked nothing like it. Hippies, artists, and self-styled iconoclasts had moved in during the mid-60s, drawn by cheap housing and a desire to carve out their own identity far from the sprawling suburbs. They modeled themselves after the bohemian enclaves of New York's Village, despite being over 1,000 miles away. Sides smirked to himself at the irony. The group calling itself Preserve the Square had only been founded in 1997. Its mission, championed by longtime residents, struck him as more than a little self-serving. The counterculture figures of the 60s had become the establishment by the 80s and 90s. Now, decades later, they clung to their property lines and cultural cachet like anyone else, decrying change while sipping champagne and calling themselves protectors. Sides found the whole thing exhausting. Nevertheless, Dr. Ford and his practice were considered tolerable by the square's longtime residents, even though most of his clients were police officers. In a place where academic credentials were often assumed to align neatly with progressive ideals, Dr. Ford was a walking contradiction, and he relished it. His mere presence in the neighborhood challenged the square's assumptions about the link between education and political orthodoxy. He wasn't someone people enjoyed sparring with on charged topics, not because he was combative, but because he'd heard every argument before and carried a calm, well-crafted response for each. And when some self-styled intellectual took a swing at him verbally, Ford's instincts as a therapist quietly took over. More than a few self-important debaters in the square walked away from those conversations unaware they'd just received a bit of free counseling. The interior of the building Ford shared with 3 other professionals looked at first glance like any well-kept home. The former dining room had been converted into a waiting area, its quiet warmth giving patients a place to gather their thoughts before sessions. From time to time, the soft, deliberate click of shoes on hardwood would carry through the halls as a therapist made their way to greet a client. Sides, however, had a different arrangement. His relationship with Dr. Ford had long since evolved beyond those formalities. Like the rest of Ford's regulars, he no longer used the waiting room after his first visit. Instead, he came straight through, knowing exactly where to go. Dr. Ford kept things just informal enough to put his clients at ease. His office laptop, over a decade old, was used solely for emails and the occasional document required by insurance companies. Its scuffed plastic casing and perpetually plugged-in charger were enough to make any would-be thief wonder why they'd even bother. There was little else of value in the room, and every inch of the building was under camera surveillance. That security allowed Dr. Ford to leave his door open between sessions, encouraging clients to settle in as though it were their own space. Sides loved that about him. He eased back in the client chair, taking a moment to rest, and smiled faintly as he heard familiar footsteps approaching. The soft knock of Dr. Ford's shoes against the hardwood grew louder, followed by his voice carrying down the hall. Just before the doctor stepped inside, Sides propped his feet up on the ottoman. "Okay," Dr. Ford said as he entered, stretching out the final vowel in his usual cadence. How are we doing today?" "I think I'm doing pretty well today, actually," Sides said, his tone unusually upbeat. And it was true. Although the case hadn't progressed as quickly as he'd hoped, the heavy malaise that had settled over him during those months of flipping properties had begun to lift. On one hand, he was confused by his own reaction. How could more stress make him happier? Yet it was undeniable. There had been money in flipping properties with Eckhart, but no spark. It was work, not purpose. Now, stepping back into a world where he met questionable characters, navigated the thin line between legal and illegal, and solved problems for those who couldn't solve them themselves, there was something in that chaos that made him feel alive again. It filled a hollow he hadn't known was there. Today, Sides felt that fullness return. He caught himself grinning wide, almost boyish, without even realizing it. "That's wonderful," Dr. Ford said, studying him with a measured smile. "You definitely look as though things are going well for you. I can see a difference in you. What has changed?" "I can't honestly say what has changed," Sides admitted, "other than that we're working again, and I genuinely feel happy about it." "Oh, you found another house to buy?" Dr. Ford asked, smiling over the rim of his notes. "No, we're working on another case." "Oh." I see Dr. Ford jotted something down quickly, the pen scratching softly against paper. "Richard, can I ask, have your stress levels increased at all since you've been on this new case?" "I'd say that's probably the case." "It is?" Dr. Ford said, his voice bright with curiosity. "Yeah," Sides replied, eyebrows raised, a grin tugging at his face. "But here's the thing, Dr. Ford. I think that I like it." Silence followed, thick and unexpected. Sides watched as Dr. Ford lowered his gaze to the notes on his lap. The grin faded from Sides' face, giving way to a look of expectation, his mind turning over the possibilities of what might come next. Dr. Ford drew in a long, deliberate breath, lips parting slightly as if to speak, but instead allowing a deep draft of air to fill his lungs. He closed his mouth, shifted in his chair, and let his eyes drift up to the ceiling, considering. Another breath, slow, intentional. Then he leaned forward, pen still poised between his fingers. The moment stretched, heavy with thought, as though Dr. Ford was choosing his words with the care of someone diffusing a live wire. "Let's work with that," Dr. Ford said, still leaning forward. "Stress is a natural part of life, Richard, and we're capable of handling different amounts of it depending on a lot of factors. A little stress is normal, expected even. However, I want to make sure we're not drifting into a place where you become addicted to stress." "Addicted?" Sides repeated, surprised. "Absolutely. It's entirely possible," Dr. Ford replied, leaning back into his chair. Sides mirrored the movement, settling back into the client's chair as the idea churned in his mind. Addicted to stress? He'd never thought of it that way. In his years on the force, he'd seen his fair share of adrenaline junkies, officers who seemed to need danger like oxygen. He'd always sorted cops into 4 types. There were the disgruntled ones who'd been passed over for promotion too many times, the pigs who wanted nothing more than status and power, the lazy ones, content to do as little as possible, and then the adrenaline junkies. Sides had problems with all 4 types in one way or another, but it was the adrenaline junkies he hated most. They ramped up tension in every situation, drove everyone around them harder, and often turned manageable scenarios into chaotic messes. They were cowboys with too much to prove, wild cards no one wanted to ride with. And yet, sitting here now, Sides wondered uneasily, was he starting to sound like one of them? Of course, Sides had never considered which of those 4 groups he might belong to. He saw himself as a good officer, one who genuinely tried to do things the right way. That didn't mean he always followed protocol to the letter, but he held a strong sense of what was reasonable. He knew that anyone interacting with the police was already under stress, even when they'd done nothing wrong. And with the Supreme Court having been decisively pro-police for over 50 years, and its current makeup suggesting little would change in their lifetime, he believed it was all the more important to walk a middle line, to be assertive enough to maintain control while staying as non-threatening as possible. To Sides, that philosophy put him squarely outside the ranks of adrenaline junkies. Those were the partners he avoided, the cowboys who escalated situations needlessly. It couldn't be possible. He couldn't be one of them. "Dr. Ford," Sides asked carefully, "how could that be possible?" Dr. Ford tilted his head, considering his words. "Perhaps addiction isn't the perfect term," he said at last. "It's not an addiction in the traditional sense. It's more when an individual has difficulty adjusting to lower stress environments." He leaned forward slightly, pen resting between his fingers. "Here's a great example, Richard. Imagine a man who works as a prison guard. Picture him walking the aisles, constantly on alert. Now, imagine him doing this for 12 hours straight. When his shift ends, his family has a dinner scheduled an hour later. He changes clothes and rushes to the restaurant. But the whole time he's there, do you think he can just turn it off and enjoy himself?" Sides listened, eyes narrowing slightly as the image formed in his mind. "Possibly," Dr. Ford continued, "but far more likely he's still scanning the room, studying the layout, checking for exits. Even while surrounded by family, he's still on guard." The analogy landed, and Sides found himself nodding slowly. There were similarities between Dr. Ford's example and his own life, more than he wanted to admit. The thought settled deep, pulling him into a rare moment of quiet introspection. After a few more of Dr. Ford's probing questions, the pieces began to align. Sides realized it wasn't adrenaline he craved, nor was it the absence of stress that unsettled him. What he truly hungered for was a faster pace of life, something the quiet routine of flipping properties with Eckhart could never offer. He needed more, at least for now. Maybe later, when the years caught up with him, he would finally slow down. But not yet. He wasn't ready to leave the force in spirit, even if his body had betrayed him. His left hand twitched slightly as the thought surfaced, and he turned it palm up, staring at the scar that marked the end of his career. He rubbed at it absently, picking at the rough edge as memories flickered behind his eyes. Dr. Ford watched without interruption, letting the silence stretch, letting the moment do its work. Sides drew in a breath and let his hand fall to his lap. The heaviness in his face softened, giving way to something else. Curiosity, a flicker of sharpness returning to his eyes. His posture straightened slightly, shifting from introspection to something more alive. He looked at Dr. Ford, and for the first time in their session, there was a hint of intrigue in his voice. "Dr. Ford, while we have time, there's something else I want to ask you." "Sure." "Do you know much about head injury?" Sides asked. "Head injury?" Dr. Ford echoed, brows lifting slightly. "Yeah, head injuries," Sides clarified, his tone steady but curious. "Well," Dr. Ford drew in a slow breath, clearly weighing his words. "In the medical sense, no. That's outside my expertise, but if we're talking about working through trauma afterward, then yes, I do." "Did something happen, Richard? Something I should know about?" Sides hesitated, eyes shifting away briefly. "Well, to be honest, I'm not really sure. I was wondering more about if you knew anything about dreams a person might have after a head injury." Dr. Ford's expression changed. Interest sharpened his features. Sides watched him slide his pen and legal pad closer, the movement deliberate. A quick scratch of ink followed, then another. Dr. Ford adjusted in his seat, posture tilting forward, pen poised. It was clear he believed Sides had just opened a door to something significant. After a few more quick notations, Dr. Ford lifted his eyes over the rim of his glasses, his voice calm but carrying a note of quiet insistence. "Dreams can have a variety of interesting interpretations, Richard," Dr. Ford began. "But these days, most scientists agree they're tied to our thoughts and feelings, things we experience during the day being processed at night. Generally speaking, we use them as an introspective tool, a way to spot patterns or anxieties we didn't realize were there." He leaned forward slightly, pen poised. What sort of dreams are you having? Well, it was really just one, actually, Sides said. Uh-huh. Dr. Ford paused his writing and looked up. What exactly happened? Sides shifted in his chair, trying to put the experience into words. I'm not really sure what I was experiencing, but everything felt so real. Like I wasn't just dreaming. I was actually there. I was in some kind of place where I couldn't see any walls, no horizon, but there were bricks under my feet. Bricks? Dr. Ford repeated, his brow lifting as his pen hovered over the page. That's right, bricks, Sides said, nodding slowly as if confirming it to himself. Anyway, all around me was this thick pink fog. It was so dense I couldn't see more than 10, maybe 20 feet ahead. I remember moving toward it, only to have it move with me. It was like I was stuck in some kind of cyclone. He paused briefly, searching for the right words. I kept hearing these drums in the distance, and after what felt like an eternity, I decided to start moving toward them. I've got to tell you, I know dreams aren't real, but I felt like I was traveling for a long time. I could feel every brick hitting the bottom of my shoes. Dr. Ford said nothing. He was intent on capturing every detail, his pen swishing steadily across the yellow pad. Line after line appeared in his deliberate script until he had filled half a page. Only then did he glance up, realizing Sides had gone quiet. He underlined a note. Everything felt real to Richard, then set his pen momentarily against the page. Sides sat back slightly, eyes drifting around the room as if trying to recapture the dream's fading edges. He scratched the back of his head, that universal gesture of self-soothing, and let out a slow breath. Dr. Ford waited, still impatient, pen lifted to signal he was ready. Sides cleared his throat and leaned forward slightly, ready to continue. I kept walking. Forever. It felt like forever, Sides said, his voice trailing as if he could still feel the distance in his bones. Eventually, I reached the base of what looked like some gigantic structure. At some point, I can't remember exactly when, the drums stopped. It was just silence and fog. I kept circling, trying to find an entrance, until I came across this massive staircase that went all the way to the top. I climbed them, one by one. Dr. Ford paused his writing, watching closely as Sides leaned forward to the edge of his chair. Sides licked his lips, then lifted his hands, pressing index fingers and thumbs together to form a triangle in the air between them. He held the shape up so Dr. Ford could see it clearly. The shape of the structure, Sides continued, was like steps, like a giant staircase, but at the very top there was this small pyramid, perfectly smooth, just like this. He angled his hands for emphasis. It had these two double doors, and I could see light seeping through the crack. I kept calling out, hoping someone would answer, but no one did. Sides' eyes unfocused for a moment, remembering. Then I heard something on the other side of those doors. It sounded like some kind of animal, clawing, scratching at the wood. I thought about running. I did. I turned back toward the stairs. He stopped, his brow furrowing as the memory caught up with him. But then I heard Paul's voice calling out to me. What happened? Dr. Ford asked, his tone a little too quick, a little too eager. I'm not sure. You're not sure? Dr. Ford blurted, incredulous. Yes, I'm not sure. I woke up, Sides said. Dr. Ford shook his head, clearly unsatisfied. He scribbled furiously on his notepad, his level of investment pushing beyond professional detachment. Sides noticed it, and even he was taken aback by how much the doctor seemed to care. Richard, I'm sorry, Dr. Ford said, catching himself. I just got caught up in the story. Please, continue. What did you see when you woke up? I saw Eckhart, Sides said after a beat. He was standing over me, patting my cheeks, telling me to wake up. So, did you pass out? Dr. Ford asked, his pen hovering. I must have. Well, Richard, what happened? What caused you to pass out? I'm not sure, Dr. Ford. Sides gave a small shrug. One moment I was going over a bookshelf, looking for something important, something out of place. I can't even remember exactly what I saw, but I remember touching something. Paul and I could never find it afterward, but we assume whatever it was must have been electrically charged. Electrically charged? Dr. Ford pressed. I could have also tripped over the coffee table, Syed said, waving off the question with a flick of his hand. I'm not really sure, to be honest. I could have tripped and hit my head on the side of the table. Well, what did Paul say happened? Dr. Ford asked. Nothing really, other than having to pull me up off the floor. He didn't see it? He wasn't paying attention, Sides admitted. Dr. Ford's pen resumed its steady movement across the legal pad. Sides could hear the faint rasp of the tip scratching over the paper. It wasn't the ending Dr. Ford seemed to want, but what else could Sides offer except the truth? He wasn't here to spin stories. He was here looking for answers, hoping for clarity. Dr. Ford finished his notes, then slipped his glasses off and rubbed at his eyes. Holding the frames lightly between two fingers, he looked back to Sides. Well, Richard, he said at last, his tone calm but measured, there are really two things going on here. First, we need to determine whether you were actually shocked, or if you simply fell and hit your head. I'm going to recommend you see a specialist who can help us figure that out. You seem fine now, but there could be residual effects that need to be ruled out. Sides nodded slightly, listening as Dr. Ford continued. Second, I can't really interpret your dream for you, other than to say it may have been caused by stress. If it happens again, I want you to let me know immediately. And if I'm right, if this is stress-related, then we need to make sure you're taking steps to start distancing yourself from anything and everything aggravating those stress levels. Dr. Ford set his glasses down on the desk. Does that sound okay with you? Sides nodded. Good, Dr. Ford said, pushing himself upright. Now, just wait here for a moment while I track down that number. Sure, Sides replied. He watched as Dr. Ford rose from his chair and stepped out of the room, the sound of his shoes echoing softly along the wooden floor. When the sound faded, Sides sat in silence, staring at nothing in particular. He hadn't gotten the answer he wanted, and truth be told, he didn't feel like making time for another specialist. But he would, because Dr. Ford would expect him to, and because Dr. Ford would want an update at their next session. With a quiet sigh, Sides reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. A missed call. From Eckhart. He unlocked the screen and found a text message waiting, a screenshot of what looked unmistakably like a religious compound. Sides studied it, recognizing the unspoken message. This would be their next stop. Probably today. He closed the phone just as the familiar sound of Dr. Ford's shoes returned, steady and measured. The doctor stepped back into the room, holding out a business card between two fingers.